Fabulous. So thank you, everybody, and welcome to this session, How to Craft a Strong Employer Brand in Early Years Recruitment. So my name's Dan Jenkins. I am Commercial Director here at Wagada Digital. I've been with the company now for around 6.5 years. I'm going to be hosting the webinar for you today, but it's not going to be all about me. We've got two fantastic speakers who we're going to introduce in a moment. So if I hand you over very quickly to Emily, who will introduce herself.
Yeah, hiya, I'm Emily. So I'm a digital marketing manager here at Wagada, and I sort of work with childcare providers with both their early years recruitment marketing and their nursery marketing as well within my role. So hopefully I've pulled together kind of all of my knowledge from my experience of working with early years settings, so that you can take away some useful tips and tricks in your role. But I'm also joined by Tim from eyworks, so I'll hand over to Tim to introduce himself.
Hi, morning everyone. I'm Tim Taylor. I'm the head of sales here at eyworks. I joined eyworks as a company when we weren't called eyworks. We were eylog back in 2016, and we've gone through an employer brand creation as we've transitioned from eylog Limited to eyworks Limited. So it's great to be involved on this call where some of those fundamental processes will be discussed, and I'll be speaking with you more towards the back end of the session around how we can then use that and how you can use that employer brand to really help drive recruitment and retention process across the nursery or nurseries that you work with, to give that consistency from both marketing and recruitment aspects within your nursery or nursery group. So great to meet you all today, and look forward to speaking with you this morning.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Tim. Fab. So just very quickly, the brands that you've got here, Wagada Digital and eyworks. So Wagada, we are a full-service digital agency. We've been established now for around 12 years. We've got 24 team members across 3 offices, team of specialists with expert in-depth knowledge. So we're a full-service digital agency. We offer digital, AI marketing, employer branding, website development, and the full sort of suite of services. When you get all of this deck across, you will be able to inquire with us directly as well, and we'll make sure that you've got all those links and bits and pieces there if you'd like to find out more. And here's some examples of the brands that we've worked with within the childcare sector. As I say, it's not just nurseries and nursery settings, it's also organisations that work within the wider education and childcare environment, offering the full suite of services to those brands, including employer branding and recruitment marketing as well. And then, Tim, if you'd like to give an overview on EY.
Yeah, sure. So eyworks is a company formed back in 2012, as I alluded to initially, as eylog Limited at the time. And over the course of the last, 12 years or so, we've evolved from providing just an observation and daily records software, a learning journal system effectively, to offering a software service to cover all elements of a nursery business and a nursery group, whether it be from your child financial management as part of a more core nursery management software, through the observation and learning journal software that we've continued, but also adding things such as a standalone inquiries module, a nursery recruitment, HR, and onboarding function too, so that a nursery or a nursery group can choose to implement our whole platform and run a fully integrated service, or choose just the elements of software from us that they need to fill gaps. So, for example, just the recruitment side that we have at this stage. And we're always happy to discuss and enhance that software for our customers to make sure that we continue to meet the growing demands and legislative changes within the sector itself.
Great.
So
yeah, Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, I was just saying over to you, Emily.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, thank you both. So yeah, let's dive into employer branding, sort of exactly what it means, and hopefully some really useful tactics that you can go ahead and utilize yourself in your early years setting. So I wanted to start by sort of explaining the context of this webinar and why recruitment marketing is so important right now. Well, if the UK government are going to fulfil their recent free childcare hours pledge, well then 40,000 extra early years staff are needed by 2025, which is a huge number in a very short amount of time. So making sure your recruiting process is top notch and retaining your staff right now is absolutely essential. So that hopefully gives you sort of a bit of context behind this webinar and why we're running it right now. And the overall solution to this is, is employer branding. And one of the most, effective ways that you can accelerate your hiring process is making sure you have a solid employer brand. It's one of the most prominent ways that you can stand out against the competition. So what actually is an employer brand? So an employer brand is a set of attributes and qualities that are often intangible that makes a company distinctive and attractive. So in essence, it's who you are, what you stand for, what's your mission as a childcare provider. And I'll go into how to solidify your employer brand in a minute. But before I did that, I did want to go through the employee journey. So what this means is that it's from the moment that an employee first hears about you, so their first, what we call touch point, all the way to making an application. And this can take quite a long time. There can be that kind of involvement in different touch points along the way. And a touch point, just so I'm clear, is every sort of engagement that a potential employee has with your brand. So this can be on social media, it could be through a paid ad, it could be through an email, one of your email marketing collateral. And it takes on average 7 to 8 marketing touch points before a user actually makes an inquiry or an application, so gets over the finishing line. And the fact that it does take between 7 and 8 touch points shows how important it is to be using a mix of marketing tactics to really help drive those applications. So if I start off with reach, now this is thinking about how potential employees first hear about you. This can be through ads, so it could be through a Facebook ad, it could be through a Google ad, or it could be through SEO, which stands for search engine optimization. And that's a lot of what we do at Wagada. So for example, an example of good SEO is when somebody types in nursery practitioner jobs in Cheltenham, for example, just using that as an example because I'm in Cheltenham, are you showing up in Google? So those are the very first touch points when a potential employee first hears about you. Moving down the funnel here to act. So this is when people take an action. Now they might engage kind of in one of your posts, or they might read one of your blogs. They might subscribe to your newsletter. So you're sort of warming up a potential employee kind of enticing them into your culture, and so they get a bit more of an idea about who you are as an early years provider. And then convert, so we're moving down this timeline, this funnel now. So that's that actual application process. So this could be through responding to email marketing collateral or applying directly on site. So that's the conversion process. And finally here is engage. And Tim, at the back end of this webinar, is going to talk more about engage. As this relates to once people are actually working for you, how are you retaining them? And this can be through benefits here, as you can see. What are you offering them? But also, how are you celebrating their success? So this can be through internal email marketing, through organic social media. How are you really making them feel like their achievements have been recognized, rewarded? And so that's all to do with the all important retainment process. Great. So now I want to move on to kind of what makes you different in a hugely crowded early years sector. And you don't need me to tell you that, where everyone's trying to recruit. You've really got to be thinking, what is actually making you different? And one of the best ways that you can stand out is through having a strong employer value proposition. But you know, what actually is an EVP? Because it might be a buzzword that you've heard before. So I do want to cover sort of the definition of an EVP. And this is a company's core benefits that make up your employer brand. An EVP, it's a promise to potential applicants about what your company is, what is your culture, in exchange for a potential recruit skills, talent, and experience. So whether you have an EVP currently certified or not, you've got to always be thinking in all of your marketing collateral, what are your values and how are you weaving that through your EVP? How are you different? How do you want to make people feel? And also, if you're starting from scratch with creating your EVP, ask your staff as well. They can be really, really valuable in terms of solidifying your culture and your brand positioning and your key sort of messaging, which I will go on to discuss now. So your brand positioning and your key messaging is taking your EVP to develop a really strong key message through all of your marketing collateral. So whether that's your content marketing, you know, your blogs, your emails, your social media posts, how are you really showing yourself off in the market? And how are you actually different? So your brand positioning, your key messaging, this can be, you know, a document that you, with 5 different statements, for example, to show what your key messaging is, and display within this messaging exactly what you can offer new recruits. How is it a positive place to work? And always, and I know Tim is going to discuss benefits a little bit further on in the webinar, but make sure that those benefits are matching what job seekers actually want. What are their expectations? What are their requirements? And make sure that is all over your key messaging, all over your brand position, and make sure that messaging is consistent. We really don't want mixed messaging, even if you know, benefits can be, I've seen you know, businesses wording messaging slightly differently, or like benefits slightly differently throughout different elements of their marketing collateral. We really want to avoid that, and you want to give consistent messaging across all of your platforms. And that means getting your recruitment team on board when they're creating the job ads. Those job ads have to line up with your marketing collateral, so it's super clear to see what your employer value proposition is and what your brand position is. Great. Yeah, and ultimately you want to be the go-to employer to work for those looking for a role within the childcare industry.
Sorry, just very quickly, I had a question come through privately, so I thought it'd be good just to jump in if that's okay.
Yeah.
We asked about creating an EVP from scratch. I know you mentioned about things like engaging the team, but the question was specifically, where would you start with developing an EVP from scratch? So what are your thoughts in terms of how you'd approach that, you know, I guess from workshopping through to start and finish? I guess it also applies to if anybody's got one but wants to reimagine it, you know. So what are your thoughts on how we would approach that, how you could approach that in an earlier setting?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the best way to do that is getting you know, key members from your teams. It could be nursery managers, it could be recruitment team, and getting them in a room together and I suppose mind mapping, brainstorming what your culture is, what your kind of business's culture means to them, and that gives you a really good place to start in terms of solidifying that employer value proposition. So listening to your kind of current staff, your current team, and getting those ideas, get those words onto a page, and then using all those ideas from the different teams to actually solidify the EVP and then go on to your brand positioning and your key messaging. So you have those documents to always, your teams to always refer back to. Does that answer your question, Dan? Is that all good? Yeah. Fab. Cool. So yeah, now we're going to dive into exactly how you can do this. So putting this all sort of into practice and what tactics will help increase those all important applications amidst this recruitment crisis. Right. Now let's start with our first tactic of content marketing. And content marketing is often used as the first touch point that a potential recruit engages with. Now, the first tactic of content marketing that I want to mention is something that really helped with All About Children's recruiting, which is a childcare provider that we've worked with previously on their employer brand and their employer branding. They've now been acquired by Part 2. But something that was really successful that we did in terms of content marketing was creating a CV template. And what we did is create this template that was downloadable, then put on every single job description on their website. And the reason that we created this CV template is because a lot of early years applicants, especially apprentices and people in the really early, people at the start of their career, they don't actually have a CV and they just don't know where to start. And what we were finding is that, and this was feedback from the recruitment team as well, so we were working really closely with the recruitment team on this, it was just putting them off applying at all. So what this downloadable template did was give them really clear guidance on a CV. So you can see here we've got where to put their contact information, their education, their experience, skills and qualifications. So it showed really clear what information we needed or what the recruitment team need in a CV. Because yeah, we really wanted to avoid any people, especially apprentices, that were really interested in applying, but they didn't have a CV and they just didn't know where to start. So this would be one of my top tips for your early years, your early years setting. And you can use Canva, you know, to create this fairly simple template. It doesn't have to be, you know, designed by a professional designer. Yeah, so a really good tool to use. And now, so I can't mention content marketing without mentioning blog content. And we do a lot of blogs at Wagada, but we never create blogs for the sake of it. So blogs have to serve a purpose. And this doesn't mean, you know, they're salesy blogs, really avoiding kind of the hard sell. But what your blog should do is offer real, meaningful advice. And from an employer branding perspective, it's your chance to give advice to potential recruits. It's your chance to kind of slowly introduce your culture and gently kind of show off your EVP and your brand messaging, and kind of entice people to the idea of your early years setting. Here are two examples that we created for All About Children, who I just mentioned were acquired by Part 2. But this blog, What is an Early Years Practitioner, was a really successful blog because we started with keyword research. So we identified that there's a lot of search volume, so a lot of people searching on Google for what is an early years practitioner. And this ended up ranking on, I think it was position 1 or 2 on Google. So people were clicking on this blog who had never heard of us before, who had never heard about All About Children. And then what was really interesting to see, and we could see this on our kind of advanced analytics tools that we use, is that people were landing on this blog and then they were going through to the relevant careers pages. And then a lot of people were then actually going on to the job descriptions and the specific job pages. So what we call this is a converting blog, because it shows that you know, it's not blogs just for the sake of blogs. It's actually driving people down that employee journey, and showing how powerful blog content can be in terms of your recruiting process. So we use keyword research tools, but what another really useful tool that you can use if you don't have those keyword research tools is a free tool called Answer the Public. It gives you ideas on content topics and shows what people are interested in your field, within your field, which in your case is of course the early years sector. So it's a really, really nice sort of tool to use, which is totally free. I think you can have about 3 or 4 searches a day, and this can really help you when you're starting out on your content marketing journey.
I've had a question come through just about frequency of content and content marketing. What are your thoughts in terms of regularity of posting? So the question was specifically how regularly we would recommend posting informational kind of blog content.
Yeah, it's interesting, because to be honest, it sort of depends on the sort of resource that you have. However, we've found real success with our early years clients in 1 or 2 blogs a month, and then keeping that consistent, so that you can repurpose that across social, across your email marketing collateral. And yeah, so it doesn't have to be loads and loads of blogs. I know there's quite a lot of there's a lot of different advice out there on like sort of blog frequency, but we found real success within the 1 to 2, sometimes 3 blogs per month.
And if I can just take on what Emily said there, I think that the biggest takeaway there for me is it's that consistency. As Emily said, it might be that you've got the resource to do more than that, or maybe less than that, but if it's consistent, then people can start associating that there'll be something that they can refer to, whether it's once a month, twice a month. I think what sometimes happens is people think, oh, we need to do this, we need to create this EVP, say. So they'll push lots of content very quickly, run out of things to do, and then have 3 or 4 months where they don't do anything. So when you're trying to build that relationship with people reviewing what you're posting and sharing to build that long-term touch point, people then come to try and find new content. Nothing's there, and they start to disengage. So I think one of the big points there that Emily raised is that consistency. They don't necessarily get associated with a volume or number per se.
Yeah, no, I think that makes absolute sense. Thanks both.
Yeah. Great. And I've just put a bit of a case study here with All About Children, who I've just mentioned. So using content marketing and some SEO tactics that we did on their website, organically we helped increase their applications by 157% for a wide range of roles. So I just sort of wanted to put this case study in, because at the end of the day, it shows this stuff works. It works if you're consistent, and if every one of your tactics has a purpose, and you have a sort of strategy behind the marketing tactics that you're engaging with. So I just wanted to put this nice kind of case study in. Great. So on to my next tactic then. So I want to talk about paid social media now, moving people down this employee journey onto the act and the convert stages of this funnel. Now, I'm not going to tell you kind of how to set up a paid social campaign, but what I want to discuss is how to make the most out of your campaigns, whether you're currently running them or you're thinking about running them in the future. I want to kind of go on to discuss, are you using social media in the best way possible? So let's start with leveraging demographics. So a really good kind of example of leveraging demographics was, I think it was last year, we were working with a client on increasing their applications. And what we did it was results day, so about this time of the year, we highlighted the apprenticeship opportunities. So we used some really nice video content of current apprentices and used that video content to show people an alternative to uni. So we ran that around 2 weeks around results day. And this was a really successful campaign in driving apprentices. So it shows how we can be really clever in being hyper targeted and using your brand positioning, your EVP, your benefit, and showing why your early years setting is a great place to work. So moving on to narrating your story with clarity and persuasion. So bring in your EVP, bring in your messaging. Exactly what are you offering people? And sometimes with paid ads, paid campaigns aren't going to work. And that's absolutely fine, because this is where you really need to be in that testing phase. You want to be A/B testing so you can find that perfect sweet spot. And leading on to that, when you're in that those A/B experiments, you want to start with a small budget. So especially if you're starting from scratch, you want to be kind of starting with, I don't know, to throw a random number, say £10 a day, and then A/B testing. So you could be testing your creative. So you could be testing which landing page is driving the most conversions or the most clicks. You could be testing ad copy. Meta you can do some really clever kind of A/B tests to find exactly what is resonating with your audience, what is driving that engagement in the all-important kind of applications. So start small with your budget and then scale. Finally, retarget people who've already engaged with your careers content. And so like I mentioned there, you can do some really clever targeting on Meta, which allows you, for example, to remarket to people who've actually already gone onto your careers pages. So, you don't need me to tell you that recruiting is a long process. People very rarely just see an ad and will apply there and then. So what you can do is people that are already familiar with your brand and they've already gone onto those careers pages, you can target those people on Meta, and you can re-engage them with video content, with your benefit, really helping them to get over that finish line and help them make that final conversion, which is an application.
Just very quickly, Em, before we move on, and to both of you, actually, to Tim as well, if Tim's got thoughts, I've certainly got some thoughts on this. It's a really good question. So Dan's come through with, where do you feel that paid social media compares against paying for online recruitment platforms? So when we think about things like Indeed and Reed, and these job boards that we're often sort of slightly held victim to in terms of needing to invest with, what are your thoughts in how you balance that against investing in, paid social media and other advertising channels?
Yeah, it's interesting, and Dan, you probably have more thoughts on further thoughts on this, but I think you have to sort of do both if possible, and have a, you don't have to go kind of crazy with the budget, but starting small with a small budget on both platforms, because it can be really lucrative on, say, advertising on Indeed or on other jobs boards. But then also, or if you're currently advertising a lot on the jobs boards, slowly starting to introduce paid social and seeing if that's converting, if that's working, and then from there you can reduce your ad spend on the jobs boards and increase paid social. But Dan, you might have some more thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think what's interesting is that a lot of it's really important to interrogate the data from paid job boards as well, because I know it's very easy when you get, if you and you pay to play, right? So on things like Indeed, there's a level of investment where you need to be visible, you need to be seen quite high up on those job boards, and you need to be in that mix. But I think what's interesting is that, you know, sometimes the data that you get might not be very clear, or it might, you know, you might think it's doing a good job and working for you, but you're not able to interrogate that. So I guess what I would always advise is interrogate the data for your brand, get whatever you can from the account manager, you know, at the platform, you know, the recruitment platform, and really kind of understand, you know, what's happening there, what it actually means, what's your cost per job application, and then what types of job applications are those, to then start to identify if you need to repurpose budget. I have worked with brands that have repurposed budget from recruitment platforms through into advertising because they feel that ultimately they're getting more bang for their buck. But again, it would depend on the platform, it would depend on, yeah, you know, how it's working for your brand. But I guess it's about starting from a data first approach, because as Em said, in a perfect world you would do it all. You'd be top of, you know, recruitment platforms, and you'd be visible on for key demographics within the next mile radius of your setting. So I think it's about getting that balance right, but it's never easy.
Can I just jump in there, Dan, as well, if possible? Cool, thank you. So it is a great question, Dan, in general, from a comparison perspective. I think one of the big things that everyone needs to bear in mind with any paid online recruitment platform or job board specifically, take Indeed, is fundamentally their aim is to drive revenue for themselves. So they could come to you and suggest that if you increase your budgetary spend, that will push you up the list from a job sponsorship perspective. However, after they get off the phone with you, they might phone me and offer me the same with a slightly enhanced budget in that way. And of course, then they've got their algorithms to work off that budgetary spend. What we often talk about with nursery specifically is about ensuring that the advert is published as wide as possible so that you increase your visibility chances across multiple platforms. I think on occasion, people get very caught up in the habit of we have to put the job on Indeed only because that's where everyone goes. But actually, if you can start changing that mindset of where people are looking for roles, and of course, that's not just an independent person change, that's a sector-wide change, that can start to then increase both retention within the sector, first of all, because of course on Indeed, someone might be looking for a vacancy today and get attracted by something outside of sector, but also start to retain that candidate as looking at just vacancies that you're advertising. Because again, Indeed is a global platform, whereas when you think if you've got something on your own website, on your own social media, you're then driving them to learn more about just you and see the vacancies only you have available. But in both scenarios, really what we find is that the application volume is often there. Sometimes the application quality might not be, but what really drives successful recruitment is around speed of response in a lot of cases. So it's about considering how and where you're publishing and how and where you can then respond if a candidate engages, because if they are applying to 2, 3, 4 vacancies, they might only be looking to do 1 or 2 interviews against that. So it becomes about response time as well and management of that process, which is where applicant tracking systems start to give a value, because it collates data from every applicant source in one place rather than you having to monitor multiple channels in that way.
You're absolutely right, because there's a big difference between 100 inquiries versus, 100 applications, and what are those applications? What volume of them became something that we could engage with? What became an interview? What became a hire? I think it's only when you start to really break that down that you start to understand what's working for you and how you get all those moving parts going together. It makes absolute sense. And I guess, Emmy, I think you're going to touch upon this a little bit in the next section. So I just want to touch on it now. Which social media platforms do you think are best for early years? Facebook feels a bit outdated for some age groups. And I think we're going to cover social media a little bit as well, but I think it's good just to throw that out there now. So then and I'm sure that Tim will have some thoughts too, but just to really kind of put that out there at this point.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I'm going to cover that, or hopefully in this section. So that leads me nicely on to organic social media. And I'll kind of discuss the sort of specifics of the platforms that we've seen work the best in a minute. But to start with, I just want to kind of make it clear how every sort of piece of social content really should have a purpose. We really want to get away from and avoid posting for the sake of it. This causes, a lack of engagement, which obviously is the opposite of what you want to achieve. But Dan, you mentioned Facebook there, and it's interesting seeing these platforms evolve and seeing kind of how the engagement has changed, I guess, depending on platform over the years. Facebook organically is in the recent years hasn't been great in terms of organic reach, but that's where you can boost a post, which means, you know, putting a little bit of budget behind an individual post and guaranteeing an increased reach. And yeah, so hopefully that answers your question in terms of Facebook, because organic can be quite tricky on Facebook specifically, but there are lots of other platforms that can be really lucrative organically. And to create that engaging content, whether that's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, you want to really try and encourage your team to be brand ambassadors. So this is something that we've seen work really well across social media, especially through video content. We've seen videos of like the team and showing off kind of a day in the life videos, really authentic videos working really well. And this will help from both a B2C marketing perspective, but also an employer branding perspective. And if you're not sure what to post, one of my tips would be to look at a national day calendar. There's loads of national day calendars out there for free, and you can create campaigns around this. So for example, today is actually Read a Book Day, so that was a nice example there. And it shows you a really good idea on kind of what to post, what to shout about, and what to create a campaign around. But in terms of platforms, this is one of our clients that we work with is B&M Care. Now they're on the other age of the other end of the age spectrum with elderly care, and you might be thinking, oh, is this relevant to you? Well, actually, they face the same challenges in terms of recruitment. So one tactic that we have found has worked really, really well in increasing that organic reach from a recruitment perspective is TikTok. So we've been doing this all sort of non-paid, although you can run TikTok ads. But doing the authentic day in the life of somebody that works in the care sector. For in your instance, it would be, say, day in the life of an early years practitioner, and this really helps boost that organic engagement much more than Facebook at the moment. So a lot of the times early year settings are stretched for resources. So we want to be picking the best types of platforms and making sure we do a small number really, really well, rather than trying to do them all not so well, or not driving that engagement that we want. Yeah. Dan, I don't know whether you had anything to add on that. Hopefully I answered the question in terms of platforms.
Yeah, all good. Be nice to have Q&A.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Perfect. So, last but sort of not least in terms of tactics, perhaps one of the most important tactics that I really want to stress is ensuring your website is as easy to navigate and to use as possible. So if your website's, slow to load, if it's hard to navigate, you really risk losing them to a competitor who does have a great website. And here at Wagada, we have a web development team, and we sort of work with clients to ensure all of the websites that we create are accessible, user-friendly, and fast. But yeah, we see it quite a lot with business. You can see it in kind of our analytics tools. if a business has a website that is slow to load, we can see that drop in engagement rate and that bounce rate, and how people are just getting kind of frustrated and leaving a website. So we want to avoid that at all costs, because you could have the best marketing in the world, but if you don't have a website that is easy to navigate, that's fast, you really risk losing those all important applications. And with this in mind, I kind of want to leave you with think mobile. So a site that performs really well on mobile, which means, you know, as well or as even better than on desktop, is also really important for Google's ranking factors, because Google takes what they call a mobile first approach. So they kind of review your mobile site even before they review what we call index your desktop site. But as well as making websites that rank well, which is obviously important for search engine optimization, a mobile friendly website is so important for user experience. Now, if you think about your kind of mobile usage and how many times if you got onto a website onto your phone and you haven't been able to click on the search bar, you haven't been able to just see all of the content, you can't sort of scroll across, and then you've just clicked off the website, you just out of frustration. We really want to avoid that at all costs, especially because potential recruits will be looking at perhaps in their lunch break, they'll be really busy, and they haven't got much time to search for those vacancies that they're looking for. So we just really want to be thinking mobile. So that kind of rounds up my marketing tactics and this section of the webinar about accelerating the application process. So I'm going to hand over to Tim in a second to go on to recruiting and retaining staff. But before that, are there any questions, or perhaps Dan, we can run questions at the end? Don't know if you've had any through.
If we run questions at the end, and we'll go through. That's okay, and then we'll have a Q&A right at the end, so that'd be perfect. Thank you so much, Emily.
Yeah, no problem.
Over to you.
Thanks, Emily, and that's great. And look, what we've looked at there very much around that creation of the employer brand value. Fundamentally, as we move into the recruitment process, it's really key to always keep that EVP in mind, because look at some of our smaller nurseries and single nurseries, even small groups across the country. A lot of the marketing and recruitment might be managed by the same person or same team, but we work with some larger groups who, of course, will have separate entities there. So if the marketing team and the recruitment team are working off different paths, then you end up with a bit of a divulgence of what you're trying to achieve as an EVP from the marketing versus the recruitment process itself. So what we'll do first of all, as Emily will just move us forwards here, is just introduce you to the concept of full cycle recruitment. And the idea of a full cycle recruitment process is the concept that a single team or a group of people are managing the entire recruitment phase from start to finish. And again, that might apply to some of the nurseries that we work with. Of course, others do have a segmentation at some point, maybe around the screening process, where they might involve nursery managers rather than run that centrally, for example. But when we think about the full cycle recruitment process, really we're looking at these key 5 steps, selecting, sometimes broken into selecting and hiring, to give a 6-stage process. But step 1 of this mechanism is very much focused on preparing the concept of what do we want or need from a candidate, first of all, who we're going to employ within a role or a vacancy. Now, if we've spent time creating an EVP, we need to make sure that the characteristics of the candidate fit within that, because fundamentally we want that candidate, if employed successfully, to represent us within both the nursery place day-to-day, but also in engagement with parents at open days, potentially, maybe even with online mechanisms that they follow. Of course, certain preparation for you guys would involve some legislative requirements. They might need a specific qualification level to support that characteristics. element that you need. But fundamentally, that preparation stage should focus on identifying the type of person you need in a role, and that should align with the EVP that you've spent the time developing and enhancing. When we then think about how are we going to source candidates for this role, this is all around the creation and advertisement of the job vacancy and advert itself. Now, again, it might be that you're involved in both that marketing effort and the recruitment scenario. So you're aware of the phrasing and the terminology being used on socials, on website, as Emily alluded to touch point with those candidates maybe 5, 6, 7 times before they reach stage of application. So we want to continue that into the advert itself. Because if someone has been engaged with the content you've shared and accesses a job advert based on that culture that they've understood you as offering, and then the job advert is written in a completely different style or structure, that might prevent them applying at that point. So we really, when we think about that sourcing point, we always emphasize the need to review job descriptions especially and job benefits especially for each advert, because it's very easy to use something that was successful 2 or 3 years ago, which was maybe before any change in EVP. And one way that you can manage that, just before we move on to screening, is the concept of, that's where our software and EY Recruit type software for applicant tracking purposes can help, because it gives clear visibility of all job adverts published across multiple channels. So rather than someone having to monitor the text on an Indeed advert versus a website post versus a Jobs by EY Recruit advert, they can see that in one place, knowing you've got that consistency of advert across those multiple channels. Thanks, Em. So once you receive applications, the screening process is very much focused on reviewing those applications to find and select the candidates initially that you feel best fit the role and your EVP, and then taking them through that scenario of inviting them to interview. Now, sometimes that screening phase or focus might include an initial telephone interview to support a CV or application provided. But really, you're working on that first application point. So we always want to ensure that when we think of what data do you want the candidate to give you to move from finding a job advert to applying, make those fields mandatory on the application process so that you can easily compare against candidates, making sure that this screening phase becomes a suitable screening phase for you rather than that becoming an interview screening phase instead. Once we've screened those candidates, we can start to select those that we do want to invite to interview and subsequently, hopefully, hire into the organisation. Now, again, when we think of the EVP proposition that's been discussed earlier in the session, we might have focused on continuing that within the job advert, continuing that within the characteristics we're looking for when screening those candidates. But at the point of interview, again, it might not be you involved in the interview process. You might delegate this over to a nursery manager at site if it's a practitioner role or apprentice role, say, within that nursery. So this is where you need to ensure and enforce that that EVP is embedded across the organisation, because you've done everything you can within that initial recruitment phase to provide that consistency. If the candidate then goes to the nursery and either has a different feel from the person interviewing them at that stage, or a different feel from the setting that maybe doesn't align fully with the EVP you've put in place, again, you might end up disengaging someone at that final hurdle, that final step, where really you're looking to invite them in and show them that everything you've put into social media effort, everything you've put into paper, everything you've had within those initial telephone conversations earlier in the recruitment phase are the true company values that you as a nursery and nursery group follow and emphasize day in, day out. Of course, at that final step of the process, we're then looking to onboard a candidate within the organisation. And onboarding really focuses initially on welcoming that new employee into the business and helping them acclimate into their position. But a lot of nurseries we would expect will be hosting, as part of this, inductions around that company culture, around that EVP, so that once they get to the stage of being within the room, working with the children, meeting the parents, they become that face of the nursery, representing you in the way that you've designed that EVP to be. And so, as we emphasised at the outset here, recruitment as a phase isn't there to run separately from that marketing effort, that employer value proposition that you've defined. It's very much to work in sync right the way through from identifying what type of person you need as a candidate, all the way through to onboarding them into that company culture, which is where we start to see the first stages of retention being embedded within that candidate themselves. Okay. So I think we can all appreciate that recruitment as a cost element is often much higher than a retention cost for a current employee. So retention becomes a really big focus once we've employed someone we feel is the right fit for us, and encouraging that employee to continue working within the organization over a successful and long period of time. Now, when we think of retention, really, this is going back to the concept Emily looked at earlier around engaging the candidate and identifying really what your benefits are and the benefits of that employee continuing to work with you versus potentially going to work elsewhere. And really, staff retention is crucial within any sector, but especially so in early years right now, with the vacancy volume in comparison to the qualified candidate volume. Naturally, retention in general involves making staff feel valued, supported, recognised in terms of who they are and their role and position within the business. And this again links all the way back to that first EVP discussion that we spoke about. How can they feel part of this positive workplace culture that you're trying to create and shout about to the wider world? Actually, we need to ensure that we embed that fully within the organisation, from staff at the top, whether it be centralised head office teams, nursery managers on site, right down to those new employees that have gone through that onboarding process. And commonly that is through that initial induction phase that we would see as part of our onboarding process from recruitment into employee in that regard. Now, when we think of company values, one of those tends to relate around how can we provide a development opportunity potentially to a candidate to ensure that they can maximise their career with us in the best possible way. Now, as nurseries, you may very well have some internal training opportunities for the employee, but sometimes this is about identifying a career pathway with that candidate from first stage of employment. They might come in, say, as an apprentice at level 2. How can we work with you to get to a level 3 stage, potentially onto room leader, and then beyond from there? If you're a nursery group, could that be training to allow them to go and take a role at another nursery within the group? So you're almost promoting from within rather than having to look externally in that way. And by providing that training and progression, sorry, I'm a little bit longer there on me, if that's okay. It's about providing those staff with those extra responsibilities and reducing the overall employee turnover cost. And commonly that is something whereby we see quite frequently nurseries come to us and explain that the reason someone's looking to leave is because there's no progression pathway in the current setting from, say, room leader to deputy manager or manager. You might have a really good retention strategy at those higher levels, so they look elsewhere to go and take that next career path elsewhere. So very much that training focus is key to encourage and map out that career pathway for the employee. Thanks, Em. So what we were looking at there in terms of company values and training, that's in terms of that personal and professional development for those employees. But alongside that, naturally, staff are always looking potentially for other opportunities based on salary comparisons, based on what they feel are external benefits outside of just training and progression. So as an employer, it's fundamentally important to keep abreast of what's going on elsewhere in the sector. That could be that in the local area, there have been changes in how roles are offered, whether it be base salary changes, whether it be offering a 4-day working week for the 40 hours rather than, say, a 5, and trying to meet the parent requirement for childcare with the employee hiring process that you go through, rather than it just being a static process of Monday to Friday, 8 till 6, for example. Especially for staff who have children of their own, they might be looking for term time opportunities. Now, that might not fully align with how you are delivering your childcare provision within your area, but are there any discounts that can be offered to encourage the staff to bring the children into care within a different room at the same time? So by being aware of what other nurseries in the local area are offering, you can ensure that you're not missing something out, but you can also start to identify what your additional benefits are in comparison to those in the local area, to shout about and promote those in a more visible way through that social media content, as touched upon earlier. One of the key points highlighted here is thinking back to the recruitment phase and that retention phase as well. If you are offering vacancies and advertising vacancies, either externally or internally, we find, and it's noted data, that any advert with a recorded salary gets a much larger volume of applications than those that simply highlight a job vacancy. So again, it's about being competitive, but also being open and transparent with what you're offering. It's the setting.
Great.
So hopefully that's given a bit of context in terms of recruitment and retention to support that EVP that Emily went through earlier. And what I'll do at this stage is I'll pass you back to Emily for just some final key takeaways to summarise what's been discussed thus far.
Amazing. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, some really important points there. So I just want to kind of summarise the webinar in key takeaways, and hopefully you've kind of found this useful. So to summarise, one of the first key takeaways is to solidify your employer value proposition. And then when you think about your content, you're creating content, you want to make sure it's purposeful, supportive, so that it advises potential recruits, whether that's through content marketing, organic social, or paid ads. And then you want to make the most out of paid social, starting small and then scaling up. And you want to ensure every piece of social content serves a purpose. And but ultimately, you want to make sure that your website is easy to navigate, especially on mobile. And then finally, as Tim just addressed, you want to always have that 6-step full cycle recruiting process in mind as you're hiring. Yes, which takes us kind of to the end of the webinar. And yeah, I guess back over to you, Dan, if there are any questions that have come in.
Thank you very much, Tim. Some really, really useful insight in there. We've answered a few questions throughout the session. For those, we are happy to stay on for a couple of minutes if there are any final questions. Did anybody have any final questions that they'd like to either pop in the chat or unmute and ask the team?
Hi, yeah, if it's okay to go now.
Go for it.
Hi, my name's Dan from Atlas Camps, and we are not a fully fledged nursery, but we are part of the UFS framework, and we are still subject to the same Ofsted inspections that any nursery does, and we face the same problems that the nursery sector do with regards to recruitment as well. One of our problems is that we've got a budget to put forward for increasing job applications and getting the word out there. So what we have to do is try and divvy up, right, where are we prioritizing this budget? What are we doing with the paid online platforms? Are we doing social media campaigns? I know in an ideal world we want to be doing a bit of both, but if you've got a pot of kind of X, what would you spend Y and Z on in terms of your opinion with this?
A really good question. Tim, did either of you want to jump in on that one initially?
I can jump in quickly there, Dan. Yeah, good question. I think it goes back to what Dan and Tim mentioned, which is about diving into the data. So what is actually driving that return on investment? So those job boards, it might look like you've had lots of kind of applications from there, but have a look in your own analytics tools and see how is that comparing to other channels, and is that actually delivering the applications that you want? Because I know job boards, they can be lots of applications, but they actually the right applications. And yeah, so I think digging into that data, but Tim or Dan, you might have more to add on that.
It's very difficult to discuss individual budgets, of course, because it depends on the urgency sometimes of a role. Analysis of the data is always key. I think that Indeed are very good at what they do. I mentioned earlier that concept of sponsorship spend, etc., and pushing people down that route. But if you've got 1,000 people sponsoring a vacancy, which is very similar, it loses the value compared to, say, one person sponsoring a vacancy in that way. So yeah, data analysis is really key, and that it might be something that's best to pick up on a kind of specific user case for you because of the environment you're working with outside of same boundaries, but maybe slightly different use cases. But yeah, data is always king in that way. And so, for example, within our EY Recruit software, our applicant tracking software, every action in terms of job advert versus application through the various stages of your recruitment journey monitored based on time at stage, success at from point, broken down per job board so that you can see if that spend is being used correctly. It also starts allowing you to then do A and B testing on job titles. Because again, going back to what Emily was speaking about earlier, it's about identifying what are the key search terms people are using at this point. That might be different now to what it was 1 month ago, 6 months ago, 1 year ago. And again, there's a habit, I think, and it's a natural one of okay, we hired someone through this job advert previously, so we can just clone that, put it straight up as is, spend exactly the same and expect the same outcome. When actually it's such a fluid marketplace that those changes on a per advert basis are also key to make sure that your advert is meeting what the requirement is at that point.
Yeah, no, I think that's really valid. I guess just finally on that, I think finding that marketing sweet spot is often quite difficult. So, you can approach it very theoretically and say, oh, we'll put this money there and that money there. But sometimes it takes a period of time and from learning to go, how do we make this work and how do we maximize the spend and what's the split? I think that things like the model that Emily shared earlier on, that kind of race framework of sort of reach, act, convert, engage, is actually quite a good way to sort of simplify it and to take a step back and go, right, which areas are we spending money, or where do we need to spend money? Can we reach people without investing heavily, but do we need to invest in the middle bit to really get them to convert? I mean, we were working with a brand for recruitment whereby it began very heavily multi-channel. The strategy involved paid social media, organic SEO, Google ads were involved. And very quickly we identified that, within that market, the aggressive nature of the Google ads campaigns, the cost per click meant it wasn't viable. So you have to move away from there and focus more heavily on certain paid social channels. And from there, we built out different campaigns. So it's sometimes it's through a learning process, but it's never easy. And I think that, as the guy said, it's about really looking at the data, trying to make data-led decisions, but then also considering where in the journey you need to invest, or what your biggest challenge is, I guess, and where to then put budget behind. Does that help?
Yeah, no, definitely. For us, it's I think what Heidi, she mentioned a good point as well about which platform, social media, do you kind of prioritize as well, because we're quite active on social media regarding getting our brand out there for parents to try and book on. But actually what we have neglected is perhaps an opportunity to get our recruitment involved with that as well, and showcasing the kind of we've got some real nice stories where we've got children who came to our camp 12 years ago who are now actively coaching in our settings, and like from that as a story perspective, which is engaging, is content gold to put out there. But I think one take home from this is actually to start to put a bit of a showcase on that, a light on that, when we're posting our content next. But then it's the toss up with, I don't want to get involved with TikTok because I can't be bothered with it, but actually it's a powerful tool for video and getting the brand out there. And Instagram is at the moment what we're finding most popular for our demographic. And it's about prioritizing which kind of social media platform to use as well, which is a bit of a struggle.
Yeah, no, I know, I understand that. One thing I would say on the social side of things, often quite a nice anecdote, is that every social media channel, when it comes out, the earliest adopters are always the youngest demographic. So it might be like 16 to 20, 16 to 25. And I know brands that say, oh, that channel's not right for us because we're trying to target people that are 35 to 45. Well, in time, first of all, that generation begins to grow with the channel, and then you've got older demographics that start to engage. So it's about never underestimating, I guess, what a channel will do in a few years when we're making those decisions about where to invest our time. But yeah, I have no doubt that kind of Instagram, from both an advertising and a content perspective, is going to be really powerful, I think, for this demographic, from a recruitment and a sales or a content perspective. So yeah, it's always that battle of where to invest your time.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Any final questions before we wrap up the session? Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you all so much for joining. I do hope it's been beneficial. I've had a lovely couple of personal messages come through as well, so thank you for that. If you have any further thoughts or questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I will make sure when we send the follow-up that we have all of the contact details. You'll have info on eyworks and Tim's contact details, as well as Em and the team at Wagada. But yeah, have a fantastic rest of the day. Have a lovely weekend when it finally comes around. I hope you dodge the rain and take it easy, and best of luck on your recruitment journey. All the very best. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.